Good day, everyone. Have you ever received a paper with a score of 18 out of 20, but the only comment from your teachers was, good job? Or maybe you received a lower score with a comment, study harder next time. Now, let me ask you, did those comments really tell you what you did well, what you need to improve, and what you should do next? Probably not. And this is where our topic for today becomes important. So, good day once again. I am Narciso Montes Jr. And for this report, I will be discussing feedback strategies under assessment in the classroom, which is part of Unit 2, Practical Foundations of Teaching in our subject or course, Field Study 1. At the end of this discussion, we should be able to understand what is feedback and identify effective feedback strategies, apply them to actual classroom situations, and appreciate how feedback supports learner improvement. So let us begin. First, what is a feedback? Okay, feedback is information given to learners about their performance, understanding, or progress in relation to a learning goal. But feedback is not simply telling a learner whether an answer is right or wrong. No, its purpose is to help learners. Again, the purpose of feedback is to help learners understand where they are now and how they can improve. Let me give you an example. Imagine a grade 8 Caroling Panlipunan class discussing the causes of the Philippine Revolution, and a student gives an answer and mentions only social inequality. Instead of simply saying, wrong, your answer is incomplete, the teacher could say, social inequality is one important factor. However, remember that the Philippine Revolution had political, social, and economic causes. Let us examine another example before you revise your answer. See, notice the difference. The second response does not simply point out the mistake, it tells the learner what was correct, what is missing, and what to do next. That is meaningful feedback. So, as future teachers, the important question is not only did I give feedback, but rather did my feedback actually help the learner know what to do next? Feedback is not the same as a grade or praise. Now, an important distinction, feedback is not exactly the same as a grade, praise, or correction. For example, a grade says 85%. This tells the learner the result, but it does not necessarily explain how to improve. And praise says, very good. Hmm, This can encourage learners, but it may not provide enough information. No? And the correction would say, that answer is incorrect. No? This identifies an error. But again, the learner may still ask, what should I do? What should I do to make it correct? Hmm? But feedback can say, your answer correctly identifies two causes. Now, add an explanation of how each cause contributed to the event. This gives the learner a clear next step. So we can remember it this way. Praise says you did well, and grade says here is your result. And the correction would say here is the error. But feedback would say here is what you did, what needs improvement, and what you can do next. Now, the question is what makes feedback effective? According to the PPST Domain 5, Strand 5.3, effective domain should be timely, accurate, and constructive. First, timely. Feedback should be given at a time when learners can still use it. For example, If students write a paragraph and the teacher gives feedback several weeks later, the learners may already have moved on to another topic. And it would be more useful if the teacher provides feedback while students still have the opportunity to revise their work. Mm. Second, accurate or the accuracy. Feedback should be correct, relevant, and based on appropriate learning criteria. For example, if a student confuses weather and climate, simply saying wrong is not enough. The teacher can explain weather refers to short term atmospheric conditions, while climate describes patterns over a longer period. No? Look at your example and determine which one it describes. See? This helps prevent misconceptions. Third is constructive. Constructive feedback is respectful, specific, and and focused on improvement. For example, instead of saying, your essay is weak, the teacher can say, your main argument is clear, but you need additional evidence to support your second point. Add one relevant example and explain its connection to your argument. This response identifies the learner's strength, the area that needs improvement, and the next step. Now that we know what feedback looks like, let us discuss some common feedback strategies. First is descriptive feedback. This explains what the learner did well and what needs improvement. Instead of simply saying, good work, a teacher can say, your explanation is clear, but add one example to support your main idea. This is more useful because the learner knows exactly what to improve. Second is oral feedback. This is given through verbal comments during or after an activity. For example, during a science recitation, the teacher may say, your answer correctly identifies evaporation. Can you explain what happens to the water after it changes into vapor? The teacher can immediately clarify misunderstandings and ask follow up questions. Third is written feedback. This can be given through activity sheets, essays, notebooks, performance tests, rubrics, or digital platforms. Say, for instance, strength is your main idea is clear. You need to improve. Add supporting evidence. And the next step, include one example from the lesson. Written feedback becomes more meaningful when learners are given an opportunity to respond or revise the work. Fourth is peer feedback. Here, learners provide feedback to one another using established criteria. For example, during a group reporting activity, classmates can check, was the information accurate? Was the presentation organized? Did all members participate? And what was one's strength? What is one suggestion for improvement? However, learners must first be taught how to give feedback that is specific and respectful. Lastly, self assessment. This allows learners to examine their own work based on criteria. For example, before submitting an essay, a learner can ask, did I answer the question? Did I provide evidence? Are my ideas organized? Or did I explain my conclusion? Through self assessment, learners become more independent and reflective about their learning. Now, let us connect everything to our role as a field study one students and a future teachers. So, when we observe an actual classroom, we should not simply write, the teacher gave feedback to the students. Instead, we should ask, was the feedback timely? Was it accurate? Was it constructive? Was it specific? Was it connected to the learning objective? And did it tell the learner what to do next? Was it respectful? And most importantly, Did the learner have an opportunity to apply the feedback? For example, instead of writing, the teacher gave comments to students. A stronger observation in the field would be after the paragraph writing activity, the teacher provided specific comments, identifying both strengths and areas for improvement. The learners were then given time to revise their work based on the feedback. No? So this is more uh, descriptive or more concise because we're not simply describing what happened, we are analyzing the quality and purpose of the feedback. At this point, let us know some common problems in giving feedback. No? Teachers may also encounter common problems. First, feedback may be too general, such as a good job. Second, there may be too much feedback, which can overwhelm learners. And the third one is feedback may be too late when learners can no longer apply it. And the fourth one is there may be no opportunity to act on the feedback. Fifth, teachers may focus only on errors instead of also recognizing strengths. And lastly, feedback may unintentionally embarrass learners. So before we end, let us remember the five important points. First is feedback is information for improvement. Second, feedback is different from a grade, praise, or simple correction. Third, feedback should be timely, accurate, and constructive. Fourth, feedback should lead to action, such as revising, practicing, reflecting, or applying what was learned. And the fifth one is feedback is a shared process. Teachers provide information, but learners must understand and use that information to improve. And as a future teachers, we should therefore remember this simple cycle: assess, give feedback, the learner acts, improve, and then reassess. And perhaps the most important question we should ask ourselves is, can the learner actually use my feedback to become better? Because effective feedback is not simply telling learners you are wrong. It is telling them, here is what you understand, here is what needs improvement, and here is what you can do next. That is how feedback becomes more than a comment. It becomes a meaningful part of assessment, teaching, and learning. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope this discussion help us become more observant in our field, study soon, and eventually more responsive and learner-centered teachers. Once again, thank you and have a great day.